Vector Optics just keeps on sending me scopes, so I'm just going to keep on reviewing them. So far, everything I've gotten from them has been pretty good at the very minimum, with things like the 2 to 12 by 44 being absolutely incredible. They offered me this 3 to 18 by 50 to review alongside with a Bushnell MPED 3 to 18 by 50 in the first focal plane that I had bought on my own. The timing on that couldn't be any better because having those two scopes side by side really showed me just how similar they were in many different aspects. Anyway, we will touch on that shortly. For right now, what comes in the box is pretty standard for Vector. It comes with everything that you might need, including rings. Granted, they might not be the correct height for you, but at least you have something. I am going to just gloss over this thing's physical controls and features because it's basically the exact same as every other Vector that I've reviewed recently, which is actually a pretty good thing because the controls are all very solid. It has a lot of good tactile feel. I really like the scallop cuts that they have on all of the touch points. The windage turrets, the elevation turrets all lock up and sound and feel really good. As far as the magnification ring, most of them like this does have a slight bit of a longer throw, usually a little bit over 180 degrees, which I'm not the biggest fan of, and it does not come with a throw lever. I don't know if they're going to start implementing a throw lever. I've talked to them about re-engineering the magnification ring to be a little bit better, but I don't know if they're ever going to do that. As far as the weight on this thing, it tips my scale at just over 28 ounces. Like I said earlier, this thing's very similar to the MPED. Just how similar might they be? Well, just to give you a rough idea, putting them side by side, you'd be hard pressed to tell which one was which, but there are a couple of key features other than the lack of slightly different controls and the actual name of the thing. The turrets are slightly different, but they are interchangeable, and that's basically the big thing. You look at the MPED, and it's a Vector Continental. When I asked Vector about this, they couldn't say anything, so I think it's actually kind of proof positive that it is made by Vector. But more on that later. Let's look at this thing's reticle. This is the first focal plane VCT34 reticle. They do offer another option for this magnification range, which is the SCFF43. They're basically the same with the exception of the center. On this particular reticle that we're looking at, the VCT, it's got a fairly large center dot, which I find to be very easy to pick up, but for a lot of people, you're probably going to think it's a little bit too large. So don't worry, if you don't like how this reticle is set up with that large center dot, the SCFF would be a better choice for you. It has a much finer crosshair. What does that look like compared to this? Well, it's pretty easy to see the difference yourself. It also has that little ranging portion over at the 3 o'clock position. For some people, they like it. For others, they won't, but at least it's mostly out of the way and shouldn't really impede with looking at targets downrange. We are going to be, of course, talking about this reticle for the rest of this video because that's what Vector sent in to me. And I have to be honest, I do like the center dot being a little bit larger. If you're holding for center, it's just about an MOA target. If you're shooting sub-MOA groups, then good for you, and the more power to you. But as far as being able to pick up this dot even at 3x, it's fairly easy to do so. Even though this reticle is illuminated, it's really not that great. If you watched my MPED 3 to 18 review, that thing has a much brighter illumination to it. And the Deploy 2 reticle is more like the second reticle that we just looked at. But I feel like with the Deploy 2 on the 3 to 18, it's just a little bit too busy, especially in the lower magnifications. It's really hard to figure out where dead center is. Sound, feel, and lockup are all very solid on this scope. Thankfully, it also has a rotational indicator in the form of that little red button that will pop up as you continue to increase your elevation. And it might actually come in handy because the total elevation gain on this optic is 44 mils. That is a very large number. Tracking wise, this thing is lacking in a little bit. As far as how the reticle lines up to the target, it's flawless. As far as shift, when we're changing either magnification or parallax, there really isn't any to speak of. Chromatic aberration, you can start seeing a little bit creep up towards the top part of the image because it's very bright up there and there's high contrast, which chromatic aberration thrives in that. As far as slop goes on either the windage or the elevation, I didn't notice any. Again, adjusting the magnification, you can clearly see that the reticle does not shift on the target, which is a very good thing. Before I start dialing for elevation, notice the very bottom mil marker on my target. It's 9 mils, and the reticle is 1/10 of a mil up above that. Keep that in mind, because as I start increasing the elevation on this, you're going to see that it's not going to track 100% perfect. 4 mils up and over, it's pretty close. The windage is excellent, but the elevation is about 1/10 or so off. Not terrible, but not the best performance. Unfortunately, when we get to 9+ mils of elevation, you can see we're now 3/10 of a mil underneath the 9 mil mark. And earlier, the hash mark on the reticle was 1/10 of a mil above that mark. So we have a total of 4/10 of a mil off at 9 mils, which is a lot. Usually, if anything's going to have some sort of discrepancy, it'll be about 2/10 of a mil. This is about double that, so 4%, which is a pretty extreme spread. I was a little disappointed with this. For lower light testing, I didn't go too crazy, only because the canopy when I filmed this was still very thick in my backyard, and looking into the shadows, anything later than, sundown is nearly impossible. Illumination on this thing is very weak. Again, if this was the MPED, it would have much brighter illumination. For most people, it's not really going to matter. It's a moot point. But for anyone that really values pretty solid illumination, well, you're going to have to look at the MPED if you're between these two. As far as what we see with the naked eye or with the naked camera and then through the scope, I don't really notice much of a brightness loss. Increasing the magnification, it does start to get darker on that outside edge, which is to be expected in looking in a much lower light environment like this. The overall sharpness of the image at the center is still very high, and the color tones are a little bit warmer than what we see with the naked eye. I found no real issues getting behind this scope at any magnification at almost any conditions. With the negative pupil of 8mm at the minimum to 2.8 at the maximum, it's pretty much on par with most other 3 to 18s on the market. The illumination might not be super bright, but when you're not perfectly behind it, you could still see it pretty far out to the point where you can't see through the scope anymore. So at least if you are in a situation like this and you're not in a very good position, the illumination should still help guide you towards the center a little bit. Now, I don't have any hands-on experience with the other reticle that's found in this scope, but I would have to safely assume that the illumination is going to be at least as bad as this. But again, that's on pure speculation. But the lower light performance on this thing isn't half bad. Most precision-focused, higher magnified optics like this 3 to 18 or most 5 to 25s and scopes within this sort of realm typically have a much finer reticle at their minimum. So that's why I don't mind that slightly larger center dot on this reticle, because as big as some people might say it is, it's still a little bit easier to pick up than if it was that little tiny crosshair. Personal preference aside, I still think that this is still a pretty solid reticle. As far as our overall view downrange, this thing has a fairly large field of view of 40.8 feet at 100 yards at the minimum and 6.8 feet at the maximum. It also has a very large view looking through it. I cannot stress that enough. It is gigantic. Focusing on our first solar panel at roughly 360 yards, I set the side parallax roughly to where it needed to be, and it was very, very close. Most of the time, the scale on the side is completely out of whack, and you might as well not even look at the numbers and just set it after you bring up the magnification and you focus on a target. But this was actually very close, a lot closer than usual. The overall image is pretty solid. You can notice here the chromatic aberration a lot more than what we've seen so far. It was a very bright sunny day when I was filming, and those solar panels have some very high contrast areas, and that's where you're really going to notice it. Slightly dialing out some of the magnification, and it mostly goes away. But still, if you're using this thing at maximum magnification on a very bright sunny day on fairly bright targets, you are really going to notice the CA. Focusing on our 1,000-yard solar panel now, it looks really friggin' solid out there. I do not adjust the side parallax for this one to see what our depth of field is going to be. And truth be told, that looks pretty friggin' solid out there. I do fine tune it after I see how close I can bring it. This bush was probably like around 15 to 20 yards, so we can dial in that close. And with a very quick twist of the side parallax, we can get that 1,000-yard solar panel looking quite good. Even with the mirage in the air from this being a very hot summer day when I filmed with this, you can still make out a lot of the fine details on both the solar panel and the tower itself. So really not a bad performance at all. Now you must be asking yourself, but I'm going to dial if I'm looking at 1,000 yards. I don't have 1,000 yards zero on my rifle. No problem. Let's add 10 full mils of elevation and reacquire our target. Down here at roughly 10x, there's no real issues. Bring it up to 18, you can see a little bit of shadow creeping in at the 9 o'clock position. Chromatic aberration is also up on the right-hand side of that solar panel. But overall, a very good performance. Typically, I've seen scopes that have a better looking image, but I've also seen scopes that have a much worse looking image when you start dialing up for elevation at this sort of distance. So kudos to you, Vector Optics. This is a very good performance. Another big important thing that I think a lot of people overlook is image stability, which is how sharp the reticle and the image are going to stay to one another when you're not perfectly behind it. At 18x, it is a very solid performance, and the overall eye box in this thing is quite impressive. Dialing it down to roughly 10x, and we still have a very wonderful looking performance. You can see that those shadows are very progressive, so as you go more and more to the extremes, it just gets a little bit darker and a little bit darker and a little bit darker, not like a snap and all of a sudden everything is black and you can't see anything. This in-between magnification of around 6x, you can see that we do have some warping to the outside part of the image, but you're so far off center at that point that I'm just impressed that you could still even look through it. The 3x in this thing is very impressive, very large and forgiving. As far as a more dynamic understanding of how this eye box is, here we are at 3x, and you can walk around this thing. Very similar to what we saw with the Bushnell Match Pro ED, which if you haven't seen that video, go watch it, because it's basically this scope, but just different in a few ways, and you'll figure out which one you like. But at 3x, this thing is excellent. At 10x, this thing is still very forgiving, and I really like the scaling of the reticle. I like everything with this scope at 10x. It's just a good, solid, performing optic. And that's part of the reason why I like this thing. I wish it tracked better, but that's the only real negative I can make as far as its overall optical performance. Even though it's not really an optical performance, really that's a physical performance. At 18x, it's about as good as I've seen for a 3 to 18. You can still move around a fair bit and still be able to find your way back to the center without much effort. It's a very solid performance. And with that, we're going to start our comparison segment. On the left will be the Vector Continental, and on the right, we're going to start with the Bushnell Match Pro ED. Again, because these two scopes are, as near as makes no difference, I feel the same. They have the same view looking through them, the same amount of scope profile, the same turrets. You can swap the caps over from one to the other. And the overall build quality and design is basically the same. But you can see that there is a minor change in the overall colors and tone of the image. The Continental actually has a little bit more contrast than the Bushnell. And even here at 100 yards, when we dial in those side parallaxes to be as close as possible, you can see that the colors are slightly different. The Continental looks like it has a little bit more information being brought out of the image on that berm, whereas with the MPED, it looks a little bit flatter and a little bit more muted. Illumination is much brighter with the MPED, but once you shut off the illumination, that reticle really becomes quite tricky to read. I think it's a little bit too busy, especially in this magnification range. In the 5 to 30, I didn't mind it anywhere near as much because that extra magnification spreads out that reticle a lot, and you have a little bit more room to work. Colors-wise, the Vector is a little bit warmer. The Bushnell is a little bit cooler. I don't know if Vector makes the MPED. I'm going on what I think That's sheer speculation and my personal ideas of just how similar these scopes are and everything that's going on. But you can see that there is a definite difference between these two. The Continental looks like it pulls out a little bit more sharpness again on that berm, whereas the MPED seems just a little bit softer. It's still a usable image, but if I had to choose between these two, it's going to be the Continental. Plus, look at the chromatic aberration on the target at 100 yards in the bottom left. The MPED shows a little bit more than what the Vector is doing. Between these two so far, I mean, could you really pick up these differences if you didn't have them side by side? I think you'd be really hard pressed to notice any of these minute details. Yes, when we have them side by side, and I had these scopes at the same time, I still do have them. And when I pick them up, it's like, yeah, you would be really, really hard pressed to figure out which one is which if you had a blind test. But this isn't a blind test. This is a very visual test. And for me here at 200 yards, I still have to give it to the Continental. Chromatic aberration here is even between both of them. But again, just looking at the target at 200 yards and all of the grass in the foreground and the background, the Continental just has a slight edge, probably only a few percent, 2 or 3%, but that might make all of the difference in the world. I also much prefer how the MPED has that little cattail built into the magnification ring. I don't know why Vector doesn't do that on all of their scopes, or rather, I don't know why the majority of manufacturers don't do that, or at least offer a ring that's multi-positional, that you can just fine-tune on it and set however you like. It can't be that expensive to do. I should also mention that I filmed these within minutes of one another, so the lighting would be as similar to each other as possible. But we're still going to have some sort of deviations. Again, I feel the Continental has a lot more information to the image, especially at that wall down at the 6 o'clock position. I mean, even the MPED's reticle doesn't seem as sharp as the Continental's reticle. Targets in the center, that's splitting hairs. Targets in the background, I think there's still a little bit more contrast and a little bit more detail with the Continental as opposed to the MPED. I don't know if this is by design. I don't know if one was built before the other. Maybe they made some tweaks to the overall designs. But between these two, which one would I go for? It's going to be the Vector. Not only is it around $300 less expensive than the Bushnell, granted you could find them on sales here and there, but I feel that the Continental is just a slightly better overall package, despite it having the fairly unimpressive tracking performance. Our next comparison is going to be with the Optica 6 3-18 by 50. This is my personal scope that I've had for years. And even though the Meopta R6s are out, which I didn't know was a thing until I stumbled upon them, and yes, I did buy one, and yes, it's the same as the Optica in a lot of ways, but I still prefer the Optica over the Meopta. But that's going to be its own review coming very soon. The Optica 6 optically is absolutely wonderful. The view through it is much smaller than what we see with the Continental. Reticle-wise, it's going to be personalized between everybody. I prefer the Optica 6's MRAD 1 reticle because it works so effectively at all magnifications. It does, however, lack a little bit of fine-tuned hold capacity inside that segmented circle, but beyond that, it's just about as good as I've ever found on a scope, at least for me. Optically, the Continental was a little bit better than the MPED, but the Optica is definitely leaps and bounds better than the Continental. It's just a better overall scope. I do, however, feel that scopes that have a smaller view looking through it typically have a little bit sharper of an image because that's how they tune the optics to get the most out of them. The analogy I use quite often is having a low resolution picture that you're trying to print out on a poster board. It's going to look grainy and poopy. Whereas if you shrink it down, it's going to look really sharp and clean. And that's what I think a lot of scopes are trying to do when they have a smaller view looking through it. Whether they actually succeed or not is entirely independent of the optic and the manufacturer. But here with the Optica 6, I think that they pulled it off extremely well. Now, the Optica is going to be much more expensive. It's going to be about $1,000. I think Euro Optics has them for like around $1,100 right now. Same thing with the Meopros. And it is a much larger expense than the Vector. twice the price is nothing to sneeze at. But as far as an overall package goes, the Optica 6 3 18 by 50 or even the Meopta R6 is just about as good of an overall package as I've found. This is currently on my Tikka CTR, and I've bought and sold a lot of optics recently. I've taken some on trade and sold them, and it's just like nothing that I can afford beats the Optica 6 as far as overall raw optical performance. I also don't take care of mine at all. I beat on it, I throw it, it gets dirty. It's a user scope, and it has not disappointed me in the slightest at all. I recommend it to anybody. Our next and last comparison is going to be with that of the Athlon Helos BTR Gen 2 4 to 20 by 50. This is an optic that I have a bit of a soft spot for. So much so, it found its way on one of my CZ457s, and I never plan on taking it off. It's a wonderful little package. Unlike the Vector or the Bushnell, both the Meopta and the Athlon have 30mm tubes, so we're going to lose a little bit of elevation gain as a result of that, but still 44 mils is just nutty. The Helos, however, is still capable of 32 mils of elevation gain, which cut that in half roughly, and then probably another mil or two depending on your zero on a flat mount or flat set of rings. And you're talking about 15 mils of adjustment, which is about what I have on mine, and that's more than enough. And the optics on the Helos are vastly superior. The magnification range is a little bit higher. We're losing 1x at the bottom, going from 3 to 4, but we're gaining 2x up top, going from 18 to 20. And as a result of that, I feel that the Helos does perform a little bit better because it's only a 5x multiplier as opposed to the 6x multiplier in the Continental. Reticle-wise, I'm a huge fan of the AMHR, whatever, blah, 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 found in the Helos. I really like the fine center dot. It's great for those precision shots, but the posts at 3, 6, 9, and 12 are still thick enough, even at lower magnifications, that it still allows you to guide your eye towards the center and make a quick shot if you had to. Optically, it's going to go to the Helos, even though right here it looks a little bit worse. I didn't have the side parallax fully dialed in, and it was a very hot, humid day, and you can see the mirage in the air. Now, I do feel that the Vector is a little more robust feeling, but the Athlon has been very solid for me. So has its little brother, the 2 to 12, which, again, I've beaten on relentlessly. And the only thing that's loosening up on it a little bit is the side parallax, but it still works and functions perfectly fine. Price-wise, the Athlon's going to be a little bit more expensive, about $100 expensive, give or take. I didn't run down any of the other specifications, but the length, they're about the same. Weight, they're about the same. Field of view, they're well within specs of one another, given the fact that there's a slight magnification difference. But the eye relief is going to be a little bit more in the favor of the Vector at 4 inches versus 3.6 with the Athlon. Either which way, I don't think you can go wrong with either of these if they're in your wheelhouse. It depends on what you're more or less going for, but I'd be happy running either of these. But I do prefer the Athlon Helos ever so slightly more. What else can I say? Between this and the MPED, I'm going to choose this. It's a lot less expensive. Yeah, there are a couple things I do prefer with the Bushnell, but overall, this is a very competent and capable package. Again, I must state that this is a serving size of 1. Is it a shame that this thing tracked within 4%? It is. Is it going to be the end of the world? No. It was consistent with my testing from when I first started out to when I finished. So at least it was consistent in that regard. And if you are using this scope to measure and dial and mill and figure your dope out, as long as you're constantly using the scope, you shouldn't have any issues. If you're changing from one optic to the next, to the next, to the next, you might have some discrepancies. So really, if you're going to throw this on a rifle and just use this, would you really notice 4%? If you're doing extremely long range stuff, yes, but if you're in the intermediate 4, maybe 500 yard range, you probably won't notice much of a difference on intermediate cartridges. Now that might sound like me trying to defend this optic in some way, shape, or form. It's not. It's just the reality of it. This still tracked worse than most other scopes that I've done. 4% is double the next worst one that I've seen without one having literally a problem. So not great. But everything else, I really think it's quite wonderful. The vector stuff, like I said, a lot of it's been really good. Some of it, a little bit mediocre. This is favoring the more mediocre side of things, but for a lot of people, for the price, this will probably make a lot of people very happy. The scope looks really good. All the controls are excellent. It does need a throw lever. It also needs the magnification ring to be tweaked to just be like 120 degrees. I don't know why more manufacturers don't do that. Reticle wise, you have this and you have the other one that you looked at, so at least you have a little bit of control with what you go with there. Image wise though, I can't really fault this. Colors wise, I can't fault it. Optical performance as a whole, I cannot fault. It's a wonderful experience getting behind it at any magnification, at almost any target, at almost any position. I really enjoyed my time with it. That is why I'm actually going to be keeping this one and selling the Bushnell, because the Bushnell just doesn't have that few extra percent worth of sharpness and overall experience getting behind it. I do prefer a couple of the things with the Bushnell. I actually prefer the capped windage. I do prefer the cattail mold, well, not molded in, but threaded into the magnification ring. And I do prefer how the turret setup is on the Bushnell a little bit more than on the Vector. It's just personal preferences. If they were the exact same price, which one would I go with? Now we're talking in the realm of maybe flip a coin. I would go with which one performed better overall. Tracking wise, the Bushnell did perform a lot better. I do like the illumination of the Bushnell. The reticle, I'm not the biggest fan of the Deploy 2 in the 3 to 18 magnification range. I'd much rather have this, even with a large center dot. But we're looking at a 300-yard target, and those little red diamonds that were right around, those are 1-inch diamonds. So you put that dot where you want a hole to show up, and if you're shooting a minute gun, then you're going to be within a 3-inch group. So is it really that big of a dot? I don't think so. For anyone that thinks that it is, again, you have the other reticle option. But overall, I think that this is a pretty good optic. Are there other options out there? There are a ton. But if you're looking for something that's within this price point that offers what the scope does, I think you could do worse. However, if I was to spend $500-600 on an optic, I'd probably just want to save up a little bit more and spend closer to $1,000 and go with an Optica 6. And that's about the harshest reality I can give you. Anyway, ladies and gentlemen, a huge thank you to Vector for sending this optic in for me to review alongside with the Bushnell Match Pro ED. It was very cool to have two basic identical scopes side by side to really see what the nuances of each one were, and there definitely are nuances. And on that note, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for watching, and as always, I'll see you again next time. And a huge thank you to my Patreon providers and my Subscribe Star subscribers. Without you, this truly wouldn't be possible. If you'd like to support my channel but don't want to join either of those, I completely understand. But you could still help by using my affiliate links in the description below, and or like, share, and subscribe as always. Again, thank you very much.